Welcome to Fluxedo Junction. I'm Scott Kukler. Each episode we bring you the best music of all genres from throughout the world, and this week we'll be speaking with our old friend, composer and multi-instrumentalist Darren Douglas Danahy. Darren has been making music for several decades with a wide variety of bands, but on his latest solo release, Soul Climate, he plays all the instruments. The EP is available through all major streaming services, as well as Darren's Bandcamp site at dddanahy.bandcamp.com. So let's start things off with the first song on the collection. Here's On the Air on Fluxedo Junction. Let's jump right into it then, and I want to remind everybody that you have a new instrumental EP coming out. It's called Soul Climate. It's going to be out, or actually, by the time this airs, it will have been out for one day. And it's available through all streaming platforms. What I wanted to ask you is, because you record and write music under different names at times, what is it that determines what identity you're going to use? In this case, obviously, you're using your own personal identity, but sometimes you work as Keldari Station, and I know there have been other projects as well. What is the determining factor? Is it working with other people versus working on your own?
Generally, it's with other people, yeah. And sometimes they're also just me, but we're different enough where I felt like I shouldn't just call it myself, because I always identified with a particular type of genre, maybe.
Uh-huh.
But I've kind of strayed away from that, and now it's only if I'm really working with other people, if there's a different project, or a name for the project. But if it's, like in this case, it's all me playing the instruments.
So what is it that motivates you these days and inspires you? Having been friends with you for a long time, I follow your activity on Facebook, and it seems like there are times where you get super, super active and wrapped up in projects, and then there are other times where it almost seems like you need to step away to give yourself something to write about.
Yeah, that's very true. I think what drives the inspiration is usually I'll hear some album by somebody, just take me by surprise, and it brings back that feeling that made me get into music in the first place. I don't know how to describe that, but
no, I get it. I think it's
just making you want to be a musician, and the older I get, the more I doubt that, and every now and again, I hear something and it just kind of propels me back into it. Wait, this is what I'm really about. This is what I'm into.
I heard an interview, I think it was with John Cleese, talking about, what it's like to, just get older with relation to the Monty Python legacy in addition to, his own legacy. And it's not an exact quote, I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but he said something to the effect of, the thing that made Monty Python special was we were all young men who were able to make each other laugh. He said when you get older, you don't laugh as much. There's not as much to laugh about. And it definitely changes the way that you work. And I related to that even as a musician, because I understand what you're saying. That feeling you get when you first discover something or several somethings when you're maybe 13, 14 years old and just really starting to take music or your instrument seriously. For me it was the Beatles, and for, everybody it's something different. And it's harder as you get older to reignite that passion. I mean, at this point, music is sort of what I do for a living, so it's almost become something that I occasionally need to take time off from just because it's what I do for a living,
Yeah.
So how does that affect you as well? Because, again, most of what you do, even your collaborations, you're far more involved on far more levels than most musicians are. Just being a multi-instrumentalist and the nature of your music, how do you rediscover that passion?
Again, it's usually through new things, and even in some cases, not just new music, but new instruments. I took up playing the drums seriously a couple of years ago, and I was always the kind of person where I could kind of play the drums. I'd get behind the kit at band practice, but I never had a drum set or took it seriously. And I found that changed everything for me. Whenever I get a new instrument and get behind it, it changes how I hear music. And drums are especially liberating because I'm suddenly not thinking about what key I'm in anymore or what scale I'm using. I'm just thinking about dynamics and what's serving the song best. And it was great because it's more like dancing, and I got really into it. So this was just as an example, which is probably why I ended up becoming a multi-instrumentalist, because I was trying to re-spark that feeling again. It's like when you fall in love for the first time in your life. You're like, oh my God, what is this? Oh, wow. And some of it is, I think, the mystery of it, you know, when you don't know what the hell you're doing, and you stumble upon some sort of magically, like, wow, this is kind of good.
I've heard other songwriters say similar things to that. That sometimes just moving to a different instrument that maybe you're less familiar with can be enough to trigger something. Especially in my case, I'm primarily a guitar player. I'm reasonably able to get by on keyboards, but I certainly don't know my way around as well as I do on the guitar. So when I do move over to the keyboard to write something, part of what's helping is that I really don't know what's not possible yet. and and so I'm just messing around until I find something. Whereas on the guitar, which is my primary instrument that I was educated on, I'm almost restricted by that in some ways because there are things I won't try.
Yeah, you almost get jaded in the way. You're like, oh, well, you can't do that. That note would go in this scale, you know, or you start to kind of like dismiss things because you know better. You know, but when you don't, like you stumble upon it, going, that's kind of cool. You know, that's a lot of fun.
What can you tell me about the influence of stimuli other than music on what you're writing? Can you be affected by something that you're reading or a movie that you just saw or even something that's going on in the world at the time. And it's a trickier question maybe to ask you than it would be for some other songwriters because not everything you write has lyrics to it. And so to kind of say, well, oh yeah, I'm influenced by Shakespeare or I'm influenced by Dylan Thomas or whatever, or yeah, I was influenced by this current event to write a song. I mean, we all know songwriters, famous ones, who have those influences. But for you, lyrically or instrumentally, how do those influences come to play?
They come into play a lot because I mean there is a lot of time I don't spend making music. You know, I have a love-hate relationship with being a musician, which is probably common. And you know, there's times when I'm just reading books or watching films or TV. And I would say the number one influence on the way I look at life and I'll offer my lyrics is Kurt Vonnegut.
Ooh.
Bigger than any songwriter apart from maybe Andy Partridge, but Kurt Vonnegut, and I've read all of his books at least 3 times each.
Wow.
He just it's like one of the only people in the world who can kind of make you look at something like, oh well, the world's ending and find the humor in that. And that's kind of like what it takes to get through what life often is. It's like to be able to find the humor at the end of the world, and he provides a lot of that. So I kind of, I take a lot from that. His books would definitely be number one on that. People like surrealist type of things. Douglas Adams. I have a traditional reading Douglas Adams books once a year or once every 2 years, reading the whole Hitchhiker's Guide series over again.
Nice.
Which has a similar effect to me as Kurt Vonnegut, where I can kind of laugh at the irony of life,
Yeah, sort of.
Same true of films.
I couldn't. That was an excellent answer to that question. I was really looking forward to your answer because I do feel like you and I we lived and grew up in the same educational system a million years ago, but we really came from completely different places and ran with. I mean, there was some crossover, but we ran with completely different crowds back then. But the more I get to know you, the more I start to realize that we have extremely similar influences, musical and non-musical. It's really strange that we didn't spend more time hanging out with each other back in those days.
Well, because in high school, something like liking a band the other person doesn't like is a tremendous big deal, and now it's like, oh, I never listened to that, I'll check them out, but when you're 17 or 18, that's like, oh, you're one of those guys. I don't know. You know what I mean? We place a lot of value on things like that.
Yeah, it's sort of a tribal identification, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's very tribal, and we're all looking for that. We're all looking for oh, you like that weird ass shit that I like? Let's hang out, And when it came to music, it was one of my biggest influences in life as a teenager. Hardly anybody liked the music I liked, except for people that were in the city or at the clubs. So, then I ran into other people who listened to this weird shit that I liked. I mean, I started off with the Beatles and Frank Sinatra and all that as a kid, but as soon as the 80s came around, I discovered New Wave somehow, and I latched onto that.
I always had friends who were art students. I mean, even in my earliest musical days, for whatever reason, I guess maybe because I also was involved in theater, there was always some crossover with art students. And it was back then in the 80s, the art students who were most keyed into New Wave. And I was, I guess, running with, I wasn't an extremely popular person by any means by then, but what crowd I did run with was sort of a hippie-ish, verging on heavy metal crowd, which, was its own weird kind of subset. And I had some real curiosity about, the new wave people, and I was friendly with quite a few, but I didn't have the courage to dive even further into it, until I got into college. And then, you buy your first Velvet Underground album, and then it's all over from there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it wasn't until I was out of my teens I realized it was all the same stuff, just looking at it from a different perspective, I mean, it doesn't matter how you wear makeup or not, you're still playing the same three chords anyway, right?
Yeah, that's well put. I love now that we're so far removed from it. What is it, 40 years later, from the 80s? I think it's 40. But, seeing, punk and new wave musicians who back then were so critical of classic rock bands, and now you see them admitting finally, well, yes, actually, we listen to them all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
It was all part of the act. And even, I mean, my favorite example of this is the Police trying to pass themselves off as a punk band when really, Andy Summers had been in the Animals, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
But I love when those lines get blurred. I find now it's more interesting for me when I see a line being blurred between like the rock world and the hip hop world, because everybody thinks that those things don't cross over, and why are there hip hop artists in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I'm fully in favor of hip hop artists being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I'm absolutely in favor of it. It should be a melting pot.
Yeah, especially since we basically stole rock and roll from African Americans anyway. But
yeah, exactly. It really makes sense. I can't stick to one genre for the course of one song, generally. The only way I can really do that is to limit my instrumentation.
Well, that's where your music...
I get it. It's all everybody's and everyone else's soup,
That's where your music, for me, becomes almost like progressive rock. I wouldn't actually classify it right down the line as progressive rock, because I know you have those influences, but that's not, that falls way short of describing what's going on with your music. There are elements of new wave, there's elements of prog rock, but there's also elements of, especially on some of the more recent stuff, I've heard with the acoustic guitar, I've heard elements of even English folk music. I guess maybe the XTC influence comes through with that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of XTC, and this is the album that I discovered a couple months ago by someone who is working with Andy Partridge from XTC named Jen Olive. That I've just fallen in love with this album. I don't think I've gone a day without playing it. It's called The Breaks, and it's just amazing. And that's heavily influenced what I'm doing now. Like a lot of the songs, they sound from some kind of finger-picked acoustic guitar type vibe, and there's a really heartfelt vocal going on, but then it goes to another place that seems otherworldly, but it doesn't sound like synthesized music or, experimental music. It still feels like you're hanging out with someone just playing a guitar and singing. It's kind of cool.
Well, your new release is called Soul Climate. It's an instrumental EP. It's out as of November 17th. It's on all streaming platforms. You do have a couple of different sites that people can go to. I know you have a Bandcamp page. Well, actually, I know of the Keldari Station Bandcamp page. Is there another one that we should know about?
Yeah, there's a DD Danahy Bandcamp page also.
Okay.
It's going to be up there.
Excellent. I also see you on Reverb Nation. I mean, I guess people can more or less just do a Google search on your name and find pretty much everything. Or Facebook, as is the case with so many people. And but if you go to, as we said, any major streaming service, any major streaming platform will by now have the EP out there. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me, man. I've had a good time, and I'm really looking forward to releasing this, and I appreciate you taking your time out to talk to me.
My pleasure, man. I always have time for an old friend, and we'll talk again soon, all right, man?
Right on.
Take care.
Have a good night, though.
Thank you.